Well, it's a little bit unusual, of course, to come to the Old Testament when it's Easter Sunday morning and you're celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and yet there's maybe no more appropriate text to come to than Isaiah 52, and by extension Isaiah 53, really, which describes so clearly in the Old Testament, hundreds of years before Jesus was born, the very death and resurrection of the Messiah. Now, it is sometimes called the forbidden chapter in Jewish circles because Isaiah 53 in particular is not included in their regular readings in the synagogue. So if you're just a Jewish person and you come very faithfully to the synagogue on Shabbat, you will not ever hear, if that's your only exposure, you will not ever hear Isaiah 53. And Jewish people will say, oh, it's because there's so much of the Old Testament, you can't get to all of it. And yet, if you were to ask a Jewish person today, if you were to read Isaiah 52, end of 52 and chapter 53, most of them would say, oh, that's in the Gospels, that's the New Testament, and we don't believe that. Well, it's very telling that that would be the case. And so we are going to consider really just a lot of Isaiah, but we're going to try and look at it through the lens of just Isaiah 52, 13 through 15. But know, and we'll probably read a lot of Isaiah 53, but know that really the whole book is speaking to us of the Messiah, Jesus. Now, Isaiah is a prophet. He's speaking to a people under judgment. Now, that should be a familiar tone because what I think I see in the internet landscape today is everyone loves judging stuff, right? You judge everything and everyone. You judge the politicians and you judge the other influencers. You judge everybody. So the judging culture that we have today, hey, you get it. When you go to Isaiah and when you read it and you just hear him speaking judgment upon the people of Judah. Now the people of Judah, if you remember, the southern kingdom had split from the northern kingdom. Israel, all the Israelites used to be in one united nation under David, King David, but they very early on split into two kingdoms. The northern kingdom has already been judged by God. 10 tribes already spread across the face of the earth, as it is to this day. The southern kingdom lasted a little bit longer, but judgment is coming. And if you're a judgy person like me, you're like, yeah, bring that judgment. I can't believe how long you've been dealing with these people, God. Why don't you just bring the hammer down, just as you and I do when we look around the world, and it comes so easy to us to judge everybody around us. And yet you ask the question, how long was God patient with them? How long was God patient with Judah? You could consider it 400 years if you go back to the beginning of the kingdom under King David. It's been about 400 years from David to this point here in Isaiah. In another sense, you could think of it as God is being patient for 1,000 years. If you go back to Moses, leading the Israelites out of Egypt into the promised land. In another sense, you could go back even 1,500 years from this point in Isaiah if you go all the way back to Abraham, and when God called Abraham and said, from you and your seed, your descendants, which will be as many as the stars, a nation will come forth. So if you go all the way back, there's 1,500 years that God has been patient with them. I think that puts the brakes on our judgmental attitude, by the way. Whatever you might think about America's cultural and spiritual situation over the past few years or few decades, you think you've been patient in putting up with it? God had been putting up with the sin of the Jewish people for 1,500 years at the point of Isaiah. If you bring it up till now, it's been 4,000 years. God has been patient with the Jewish people. And yet, truly, God has been patient with sinners since the dawn of time, since humanity even began, since Genesis chapter 3 in the garden where Adam and Eve fell away from honoring their king in order to pursue their own kingship and kingdom. And that's all in the background. It's all in the background of this, one of the most famous passages of Isaiah describing the salvation God was going to bring, not only to the Jewish people. This is not just about God saving a select group out of the world, but really bringing a salvation to the whole world. And that is because the problem of sin, defying God's purpose and plan, insulting his character and nature, that isn't just an Israelite problem. That is a worldwide problem. That's a humanity problem. And that's a you and me problem. In other words, if you have the sense at all that there is something wrong with this world, something to be judgy about, if you think there's something at all wrong with how people treat each other, or something wrong with how you respond to life, all of that is a reflection of the fact that you and I are made in the image of God, and we're not just chemical reactions, atoms bouncing off of each other. And part of that is knowing that there is something wrong, even evil in the world, that things are not right. That is showing it's not just us being judgy, it is us having the sense that there is right and wrong, good and evil, and there should be consequences for it. And if we're being honest, we should be able to admit that we aren't right either. That the judginess shouldn't just be one directional from here out to everyone else that I don't like, but that actually I know that I am not right as well. And that's the story the Bible is telling. And in Isaiah, perhaps more than in any other book of the Old Testament, God is painting a picture of a person that God himself is raising up to make things right. Now, as tempted, let's preach through the entire book of Isaiah, all 66 chapters this morning, just fly by it. Think about it. If I spent just a minute on every chapter, we'd be here 66 minutes. So as it is, it'll be 3 verses in 66 minutes. Just kidding, probably. Yeah, if you've been here a while, you know what I'm talking about. First thing, this servant, I'm spoiling it. This person that God is raising up is God. He's king, he's holy. Look at Isaiah chapter 6. After getting some judgments out of the way, after talking about how faithless and ungodly the people had become, and as there's prophecy of judgment, there's a vision that Isaiah experiences in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, starting in verse 1. Isaiah 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the threshold shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. One thing I fear in our culture today is the lack of any sense of awe and wonder anymore. Now, we have a lot of spectacle these days. Yesterday, I saw a drone show made up of thousands and thousands of drones, automated drones in the sky, making a picture of Jesus on the cross, right? Thousands coordinated. And I'm not saying that isn't an incredible feat of engineering and design and creativity, but think about that. You could see thousands of drones making a picture of Jesus in the sky, and you're going to forget about that in 72 hours. I would have forgotten about it, except I turned into illustration, but I'd nearly forgotten about it. It's something no one has ever seen before, right? That's a first in humanity. And it's the kind of thing where you just take your phone out, you take a video, and then you forget you took a video of it. Let's be honest. You probably cannot think of a time when you were so scared you thought you would faint, or like you were going to soil yourself as an adult, or just collapse and beg for your life. How many of you have been in that situation? Probably very, very few. Fortunately, how comfortable we are. How comfortable we are with not considering and not ever having to face anything worthy of that kind of fear or that kind of worship. I almost was thinking just how absurd it would be if Isaiah stood there as this vision of the Lord, and the hem, the train of his robe is filling this gigantic temple. It's just to show how, like a bride, having a very long train on her dress, and you can see how you might get the idea. Well, the longer the train, on the dress, the more glorious that is, or more beautiful that is, or more expensive that is, and that's kind of the idea. Just this regal figure on a throne, and he has so much glory that his robe itself just fills the temple, and it's made of fine cloth. It's not just not just rags, but something that is very in itself expensive and worthy. And you have the shudderings and all these things happening there. If Isaiah just stood there and then reached in his pocket and just started filming it, saying, "This is crazy. Do you see this? Incredible." I mean, I fear that's the kind of people we become. You can almost imagine that, right? Isn't that sad? You can practically imagine that as a skit. And in 72 hours, someone's going to make a skit like that. Just that kind of culture that we live in, where we read Isaiah 6, and you don't just sit down and think, how is it a blessing or not that I've never been in that kind of fear and terror of my life and my soul. I say that, and it makes it sound as if in order to experience that, God would have to, whisk you up into this vision of his royalty and his power with smoke and with all of these voices and earthquakes to get worship out of you. But he doesn't. I fully believe that you don't have to go anywhere to marvel at the Lord, to be humbled by his glory. I don't think you need to go anywhere. I think you could do it right now. I think you could look at anything. I know Good Friday, I brought up just that idea again as astronauts are going around the moon right now. You can fit every planet in our solar system in between the distance between us and the moon. It's like 250,000 miles. You can fit every planet in between that, right? That is kind of a marvelous, humbling thought right there. You could think about that right now. You could take almost any fact of the creation and worship God. Again, famously, Jonathan Edwards, probably the greatest American theologian. I mean, he sat there and just thought about spiders, just watching them, making webs and flying off. I look at, we have baby chicks. Well, they're grown up now. They grow so fast. No, they're like little tiny. They as soon as they come out of the egg, they can walk, they can feed themselves, and they can groom themselves right out of the egg. My kids don't do any of those now. Some of them do. You know what I mean? But isn't that marvelous? Isn't that crazy that a little chicken No teaching. Right? It's not like they could see the mother doing any of those things. It's stuck in the egg. It comes out immediately. Walking on those little tiny spindly legs, right? And grooming itself and eating and drinking. That's glorious. That's glorious. That should elicit worship. I'm not saying that that this isn't something tremendous, right, that Isaiah saw. Like it is blows that out of the water, right? But imagine if I can glorify God and just be humbled and marveled at his design at the chicken, what Isaiah experienced here, far more. You can start to see why he is in absolute terror, because in a sense, the mind that made the baby chicken and everything else that we see, I mean, you can take anything and do this. He is the one who made me. This God also made me. This wise creator who must then be sovereign and Lord and over everything, the ultimate authority, he is over me. And he is glorious, and he is terrifying, and he is majestic. And yet this is what John says in John 12:41. John 12:41. Isaiah said these things because he saw his glory and spoke of him, Jesus. So he quotes Isaiah just prior. And he said, he said these things because he saw his glory, Jesus' glory, and spoke of him. So Isaiah 6 is a picture of Jesus Christ, a picture of this person, a portrait that Isaiah's painting of the one who must save humanity, must save the Jews. And we see the first picture is just this glorious, majestic, holy figure on a throne. And yet, John says, this man who you see, the carpenter's son, is this figure in Isaiah 6. How do you reconcile that? Hold on. Jesus came to the people, but he had no robe of glory. He had a robe of flesh. Why didn't Jesus come with all that glory to make the people tremble with fear? Because the king and the person that must save us, he isn't just glorious, he's glorious in his humility. And so Isaiah paints another picture of this one who must come and save us. And he's not just king and glorious and holy, he's also humble and a servant and a savior. In Isaiah 42, we see this portrait. Isaiah 42, starting verse 1. Behold my servant, this is God speaking, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. Thus says God, Yahweh, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it, and spirit to those who walk in it. I am Yahweh. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations, to open the eyes that are blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prison those who sit in darkness. I am Yahweh. That is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols. Behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I now declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. We see here, the same God, because of the second half of that, clearly, this is a God of glory and wonder and majesty, like we saw in Isaiah 6. But now we see that he is also someone who is so kind and so gentle. He brings justice, but not through force, not a loud voice. He doesn't cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street, although justice should be proclaimed boldly and loudly. Justice is something that should ring forth. It should be obvious. It should be resounding. It shouldn't be hushed and quiet. And yet he says, here, he doesn't do it that way. In fact, he is going to bring justice by being gentle and lowly, even to the weakest and meekest and lowly. He says, a bruised reed he will not break. Well, a reed is just like a stick. A bruised reed is one that, has been bent, and therefore you can't use it. You can't use it to hold any, as a ruler. It can't hold anything. It's useless. A bruised reed would be considered useless. But he handles it gently. Or maybe a better picture that we can understand a little bit more is a faintly burning wick he will not quench. So you think of a candle that's just about to burn out. If you've ever had a candle in your room and you got all the way down to the bottom, it just starts to flicker, right? Because you just know it's about to go out. It's basically useless, right? A candle at that point, you might as well do what? Toss it. Just quench it and toss it. Any other person would. Get a new candle. But the servant doesn't even breathe on it. And these are pictures of gentleness and humility. These are pictures very much in contrast to the king in Isaiah 6, whose voice shakes the foundations, and there's seraphim that are flying and covering their eyes and their feet. Holy, holy, holy. That whole picture is intended to make you melt into the ground. If there was a bruised reed or a faintly burning wick in that temple, in that picture, it would have been just blasted. It would have been blown, broken. It just would have been quenched. But here, the same king is portrayed as just handling so gently even the most frailest and broken thing. And perhaps we should remember that the church exists to demonstrate that kind of humility and service. I should have said it before too, that the church exists to be a place where we call out wonder and marvelous things. That the church, not only when we gather together, should be a place where we are marveling at, wondering at glorious things. The church should also be a place where we demonstrate the value of humility and service and gentleness as we deal with each other. Well, now you might say, though, what does it have to do with justice? Because again, justice typically is associated, in all honesty, with enforcement. What is justice without enforcement? If you say this is against the law, but if you do it, I'm going to give you a stern look, then people are just going to do it. But if you say, if you do this wrong, we're going to clap handcuffs on you and take you to the jail and process you, and you might have to pay a fine, or you might have to go away from society for several years. So that's kind of forceful. You don't associate that with gentleness. Why is this one who must save us, that God is preparing, why must he be so gentle? Or how does he accomplish this justice without breaking stuff or enforcing stuff? Well, there's an irony to this. We have here again an exaltation in the same verses where we talk about the gentleness. We have this exaltation of who this person is, that he is that he is God, really, that he is the one that is being empowered and sent by God as God to accomplish this justice. Now, it's ironic because servants and slaves, historically speaking, subject to a lot of injustice. who do you expect, typically speaking, to establish justice and bring justice? People in positions of power and authority. It's kind of their job, right, to enforce justice, enforce laws. So the irony is that this servant is, of course, no mere servant. He's also the king. But he's a king of such grandness and such glory that he is no fear or challenge to him. And in that, he chooses to be so gentle. He doesn't need to worry about someone else taking his job. He doesn't have to worry about raising up an army to protect his power and influence. He doesn't need to fire people or anything like that to protect his administration. He is a king that has the total luxury as being supreme to choose to be an advocate for the least and the weak and the lowly, who sees every least act of injustice on the least of persons and gently cares for every afflicted person, promising them in gentle and hushed tones, I will bring my full, furious wrath and judgment against any who would do wrong. He doesn't need to yell that. He doesn't need to be bombastic in his words. He can be absolutely gentle and assure every broken-hearted person who's ever suffered any injustice, I will take care of it. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to be bombastic. I will take care of it. And in another sense, he's also gentle because of this. We are, as sinners, the ones who deserve God's wrath and judgment. That it's not just them out there who are unjust, and I'm always suffering injustice. Sometimes I'm the one that's inflicting injustice upon others. And God says to us, who are both the ones who commit sin and the victims of sin, who both break other people with our sin and are broken by sin, he treats us all so graciously and gently. The same king of Isaiah 6 is the one who will hardly even breathe on a candle about to go out. He is both. How do we reconcile these two things? The servant and the king, the gentleness and the glory, the humility and the holiness. Well, we see it most at the cross and the empty tomb. Going back to Isaiah 52 now. Isaiah 52, 13 through the end of chapter 53, it describes hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, the death of Jesus. Isaiah 52, 13 says, Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. This is the servant who is exalted or is prosperous. He's high and lifted up. That's the language of Isaiah 6. I saw the Lord high and lifted up. So here, it is very shocking in just very few words to see the phrase that a servant, a slave, is going to be, and these are three words that just go on top of each other. High, lifted up, exalted. They all mean up. Right? And we've talked about this before. Why is up so constantly associated with like God and glory and all those things? Because just up is bigger than you, right? It's bigger than you. And there's no more simple grasp, like even a childish kind of grasp of like something being prominent than it just being bigger than you. So kids are always looking up and big, and they just assume if you're bigger than them, you must have authority. If you're bigger than them, you must be stronger than them. It's just natural kind of analogies. It doesn't change. That's why that kind of language, like cross-linguistically, it just always means something good and grand. So you have three of these adjectives just stacked up on a servant. That's what you don't expect. You expect that to follow those who are popular or rich, those who have the right lineage and descendancy. No, the slave shall be high, lifted up, exalted. Again, we're painting the picture of the Savior, the one who must come and redeem mankind. But there's kind of a futureness to this, because inasmuch as he will be high and lifted up and exalted, we see verse 14, as many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred, beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. This is a description of a kind of torture and suffering so disfiguring, it would be hard to tell that you were even looking at a human being. Isaiah 53, well, let me step back. We are talking here about crucifixion. We're talking here about the physical torture and death of Jesus Christ by this Roman system of punishment called crucifixion. I think it is almost, not comical is not the right word. I'm fumbling. It is almost a oversimplification. That's okay. That'll do. I'll come up with a better word tonight when I'm lying in bed. But in the Gospels, most of the Gospels, it just says this, and they led him to be crucified, or, and they crucified him. It's just like a sentence or a phrase without saying anything at all about what crucifixion is. In other words, you would not really get a good idea of what crucifixion is by just reading the text itself, right? You know nails are involved maybe, and some kind of wooden cross. But truly, one of the reasons it does it that way is because everybody knew what a crucifixion was at the time of Jesus. No need to explain or go into the details. But beyond that, it is such a cruel way to execute someone. You don't talk about it. You just don't talk about it. But we must, because Isaiah 53, and I will read it for you, or most of it anyway, is going to describe the spiritual reality that was happening simultaneously, synchronously, inextricably with the torn flesh, the crown of thorns, the nails driven through the hands and feet, each shuddering breath, each splinter digging into his raw back. What was happening was not just physical torture, but spiritual, glorious truth that our redemption was being bought in that exact moment. So think of the crucifixion, but see, understand, believe the spiritual truth. So see it in your mind, but believe this. Isaiah 53:3, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, as one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned, every one, to his own way. And Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and a judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of Yahweh to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. That is happening simultaneously as Christ is crucified, as he's being whipped and tortured, as a crown of thorns is being shoved on his head, as he's being mocked and spit upon and hit, as he's stripped naked and nailed to a piece of wood. And as he, with every breath, has pain coursing through his entire body, it is not just a physical torture. Have some men suffered more in a physical sense? Perhaps. But none has suffered the weight and the grief and the burden of Yahweh crushing in order to make an atonement for sinners. On that day, the greatest act of love and sacrifice was on display vividly in every drop of blood shed for sinners. This is how you bring justice, with humility. Again, usually you enforce justice, you uphold justice, you execute justice. But Jesus was not forced on the cross. He went willingly as an act of love. Jesus was not held up on the cross by nails. He was lifted up as a sacrifice for sinners. Jesus was not executed by Jews or Romans. He executed the perfect plan of God to bring redemption to all who believe. The ultimate act of service as the servant was to lay down his life for us on the cross for our sins, which keep us from God. Now, just as a quick application, by the way, everything you do has a spiritual reality and truth to it as well. On the outside, you are just going along, and maybe anyone seeing you sees you doing your chores or driving to work or taking the kids to school or studying. But spiritually, there's truth and meaning and weight behind all of it that God sees. But I'd encourage you to see it too in your own life and the lives of others. It's not ever just seeing physical things happening, events transpiring. Always there's spiritual truth and reality to it. And in the cross, there was the ultimate reality of the love of God on full display. The cross shows us the gentleness and humility, but the empty tomb shows us the glory and the holiness. Going back to Isaiah 52, he says, verse 15, so shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, or which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. The ultimate vindication that he is the glorious king is seen in the empty tomb. He is the king over every other king. And he's a better king. He's a more benevolent king than any other king. Sprinkling in the Old Testament is often associated with cleansing or purifying. So here the king is cleansing the nations. That is to say, even in the same measure as they were astonished by how unhuman the servant looked, right? So how startling or astonished they are at how disgusting, inhuman the servant looks. In equal measure, they will see and understand that he is the one who blesses and heals and forgives and cleans. Politicians so often make promises to bring prosperity to their people and fail to deliver, while they themselves live so lavishly. Not so the servant king. He sacrifices himself in order to bless all the nations. So to the degree that he was marred and disfigured, and you wonder and are astonished by that, in the same measure, they will understand that he is good, that he is kind and blesses. His kingship is greater because his kingship shuts the mouths of every other king. Have you ever gotten sick and tired of the grand lies and self-assured rhetoric of politicians and rulers and presidents and dictators and kings? If you ever wanted to scream, can't you just shut up? Just shut up. Close your mouth. All of you haughty, wicked, arrogant people who claim to know what's best for the people. If you ever wanted to say, shut up, be a Christian. Because your king is going to shut the mouths of every other king and ruler. You can appreciate here that this risen king, by his humiliation, will be exalted. By his humiliation, will shut their mouths. You see, every politician is trying to avoid embarrassing situations because they know that the media is going to, blast it everywhere and it'll become a meme. And so you just try to avoid embarrassing, faux pas and circumstances and situations and all that, right? Here is this king in the most shameful condition that you could find, naked, stripped, bloodied, put on display as an evildoer, and he is exalted. In that humiliation, he shuts the mouths because he accomplished what none of them could do, which is to use his power and authority to save and redeem and bless his people. Shuts their mouths. And this servant king, he will cause all the other kings to come to him for homage so that he might bless them. Isaiah 49:7. This is a nice picture, especially if you've been on the news too much. Isaiah 49:7. Thus says Yahweh, the Redeemer of Israel and his Holy One, to one deeply despised, abhorred by the nation, the servant of rulers. Kings shall see and arise, princes, and they shall prostrate themselves, because of Yahweh who is faithful, the Holy One of Israel who has chosen you. His kingship is beyond anything these worldly leaders can understand. That which has not been told them they see, that which they have not heard, they understand. In other words, they could not comprehend what this king is like. It doesn't make sense to them. It's a statement about their ignorance. The nations of the world don't know and can't comprehend such a kingship that is based on humility and sacrifice and love. It's just not the way of the world, is it? That's not how people get to power and influence, by giving everything away. They can't think of things like that. And to be honest, we can't either. We would never have come up with a plan for God to save humanity by God himself humbling himself. You don't have the audacity to suggest such a thing. We're sinners, we're worldly sinners. And we think, just like all the kings and rulers of the world do, that we need to get what's ours, that we need to hand out our own justice, that we need to do things my way or the highway. And all of that is contrary to the idea that what we really need is a servant king. These world leaders aren't sprinkled with that knowledge yet. I think it's telling that I know that our nature is to think and act that way, because no matter what kind of system, that we have in terms of government all around the world. You got communism and capitalism. You've got, we're a democratic republic, and you've got all different systems. But when it comes down to it, when you think of a nation, you typically just think of whoever is in charge. It's not like when people think of America, they think, oh, they have a tripartite government. There's executive, judicial, legislative, and in the legislative branch, they got the Supreme Court and the or I'm sorry, not Supreme Court, that's judicial, but they got two houses, they got House, Senate. No one says that. They just think the president, right? And you think of a communist country, in the word is communist, everybody. But you know what? You just think of the guy that's in charge. That's just a cross. That's our nature, is that we gravitate towards the idea that someone has got to be in charge. One person represents everyone. We look to one person to represent things, and so often they reflect just the kind of people we are, which again is selfish sinners, afraid sinners, broken sinners. It's so clear that we need the servant king. The world leaders, they will come to that knowledge one day. They will see that the way they tried to get power and influence was never the way God intended. We will see. We will finally have our ignorance and our eyes lifted truly to what it meant that Christ, Son of God and Son of Man, had to come, take on human form, and be crucified for our sins. Having said all of that, the King will be exalted. That is yet future. The first coming of Christ was as servant. The second coming will be as this king. Why is there this delay, 2,000 years of delay? Well, just like we were saying at the beginning, why is God so patient? Why doesn't he just bring judgment? It's because there are still sinners out there. Sinners like you and me who need to come to faith in this servant king that Isaiah prophesied so many years ago. We are all separated from the creator God of the universe in our selfishness and pride. He calls us to be his people. We were his people, Adam and Eve. But just as they did, we reject his kingdom, his kingship, in favor of trying to make our own little kingdom. That's what most of us do, our little short lives, make our own kingdom. But there's only one kingdom that lasts forever, and only one king who is worthy of that kingdom. But how can you be a part of that kingdom when you're trying to make your own kingdom? You know what that is called? Rebellion, treason. And the penalty for treason in almost any country or nation is death. And so it is for all of us who've ever tried to set up a kingdom against God's kingdom. We are worthy of his judgment. How can we be a part of the kingdom of God? Not by works, not by anything we've ever done or achieved. Only by a traitor's death could we ever even pay the penalty. But all that does is make us face the consequence of our sin. No, instead, Isaiah paints the picture of the servant king who took our death in our place, who substituted himself to take our sins and pay the penalty for us and make us right with God, and rose again from the dead on the third day to bring us to him as brothers and sisters of God, to say to the Father, these ones I have cleansed, these ones I have paid for by my precious and holy blood. They are no longer sinners, but they are your children. They are my brothers and sisters, and they will rule and reign together with me, the King of Kings. That act of love confirmed to us as he laid down his life and took it up again. If you are not a Christian this morning, I urge you, I beg you to consider these things. Whether in your own heart you are broken by sin, you think maybe you're unforgivable. A bruised reed he will not break. Or perhaps you think, well, I don't need God. I've got my own thing. I'm doing it my own way. It is almost inconceivable to think that the world would revolve around you in such a way that you could do whatever you want. And if everyone did whatever they wanted and you apply that to everyone, it'd be chaos. You think it's good for you, but if you multiply that by 8 billion, the world would be in utter distress. No, the world is not made by you, and so you are not the one who is in charge. If you're not a Christian this morning, understand that there is a day coming where you will face a holy God, the one who made you, and will say, what did you do with this one life I gave? And if your answer is, I spent it for myself, for my glory, he will doom you, condemn you. But there is freedom, and there is forgiveness, and there is glory for all who would do this simple thing. Humble yourself. Cry out to God for forgiveness of sins in Christ, and he will. You bring nothing to this except the sin that makes your salvation necessary. Will you overcome your pride and your ego this morning to come to him? If you are a Christian this morning, what a good day it is to tell someone about Jesus, the King who is coming. What a glorious day it is to be full of the good news and have hope and courage that there is a meaning and purpose to all of these things, and to go forth boldly from this place this morning, triumphantly, with the message, Christ is coming. Christ is coming. He comes, and he will make all things new. Put your faith in him. Believe in him.